Some of the most recent updates that we have in Battle Cats have included the addition of a couple of true form for Advent Cats. Advent Cats are a term that the community used to refer to units we get from deadly or merciless event bosses. The three main highlights of the recent months are the true form for Bakery Cat, Vodka Cat, and Slime Cat, each giving them a new form as Fried Chicken Cat, Royal Guard Cat, and Slime Dumpling Cat respectively. Slime, who is obtained by beating Queen Mother V, was already a really good unit to begin with, an extremely powerful nuker with wave attack, and the true form grants him extra speed, range, and wave level, which gives him more consistency and a stronger presence on the field. And then Bakery Cat, which is obtained from beating Doremi. He's a unit that's specialized in applying Curse. Curse as an ability is fine, but he's lacking in range and only have single target attack, so he couldn't really curse enemies safely or consistently despite having piercing range. But the true form gave him area attack, better range, and even able to curse relic enemies. And the area attack and the range increase is very big for him as it allows him to actually function properly. And despite his damage being unchanged, area attack and range change also makes his damage output more valuable. And since he has the zombie killer ability, you can also use the true form as a mid-range anti-zombie attacker. And then we get to the star of the show, Vodka Cat, a unit that drops from beating Saint Papu. He is a single target melee unit that deals massive damage against relic enemies with very fast cooldown at a pretty cheap cost with extremely fast attack speed. But his overall stats is just really unimpressive, having no range, no health, relatively slow speed, and even if you do play around it, his damage is generally not that worth it. The damage is not too terrible, but it's far from practical. He's not strong enough to stand out compared to any other anti-relic options, and so he sees little to no usage. And now the true form, Royal Guard, buffs majority of his stats. His damage, health, speed are all dramatically increased, and he gets a tiny boost of range as well, and as an extra, he also now deals massive damage against alien enemies, as well as having wave immunity. These are pretty big changes, not just huge stat changes, but also getting 2 extra niche to work on. It's quite a lot. Generally, a good chunk of the community reacts pretty positively with Royal Guard's changes, as his stat buffs are very noticeable and is good all across the board. But there's also a decent amount of the community that still doubts his power. After all, his range is still pretty low, and his attacks are still single target, which would surely limit his usage. And there's already so many nice cat units that deals with relics well in the modern days. So the question that pops in a lot of people's head is it really worth using Royal Guard over any other things that we already have? Well, to answer that, let's first re-evaluate and go over his stats and his changes in true form. At level 30, in his previous forms, his damage per hit used to be 1000, but in his true form, Royal Guard's damage is at 1780, increasing for an extra 75%. His health was 15,000 and is now 23,800, which is an extra 58%. And then his speed is increased from 11 to 15, and finally his range goes from 130 to 165. Now, I think the stat that a lot of people are more interested in is the damage increase. A 75% damage boost is crazy good. However, the one that I want you to focus first and foremost is actually his health and speed. These 2 changes, in my opinion, are the most important changes that Royal Guard received. If you look at the list of common relic enemies in the game, majority of relic enemies in the game are high range supports or very short range peons. Meanwhile, there's basically almost no fast pushing mid-range relic enemies. Imagine something like Gories or Oda variants or Bear variants. There is no relic variants for these kind of enemies. The closest thing would be Relic Bun Bun, but he rarely ever appears anywhere. Meanwhile, high range support enemies like Otom or Loki are designed not to kill, but to disrupt your units with curse from a big range, and have just enough damage to make them not too easy to approach. But these are exactly where Royal Guard's health and speed increase becomes very vital. With more speed, he is now able to get into melee range way faster, effectively needing to tank less hits to get into the range of these kinds of enemies, on top of having more health to tank more hits while dealing more damage. An important thing to note is that Royal Guard only has 2 knockback counts, so he can tank through without getting interrupted by chip damage too easily. This even makes him work well against certain relic bosses like Dogumaru, Nala, or Luza. His extra speed makes it easier to time him between the boss's attack cycle, and his extra health allows him to tank hits from some bosses that isn't Luza. And so you're able to deal a pretty good amount of damage before he eventually dies. Then let's talk about his usage against relic peons. Before his true form, he has a couple of trouble dealing with relic peons. He does have enough range to outrange the peon, peons, but not enough to be safe in the slightest. And then his attacks are only single target, and then he also dies pretty easily. But the worst part of all is that his attack is a high speed based attack and not a high damage per hit type attack. This is especially bad against enemies like Sorel, who has a whopping 5 knockback count. The low damage per hit means Sorel just keeps on getting knocked back by Vodka Cat, prolonging the Sorel's lifespan, which can be bad news. Now, his true form does not change his attack speed, but I think he's actually great against Sorel now. But hold on, you might ask, why would that be the case? He still can't nuke down Sorel without knocking it back a lot, right? That is correct, except you're glossing over one thing. Royal Guard's new damage is so incredibly high that ultimately, this really doesn't matter. Does he still knock Sorel back a lot? Yes. But that's irrelevant. He still kills Sorel incredibly fast anyways. Usually, Can-Can, Slime, and Bullet Train are your usual normal Sorel counters. But if you can't one-shot the Sorel, you'd usually need to use one to chip it down, then spawn another unit to finish it off. But for the case of Royal Guard, he can independently destroy Sorel all by himself. And even if you somehow fail to kill the Sorel in one Royal Guard, you can just spawn another. That's right, on top of having good stats, Royal Guard also has a really short 4.5 seconds cooldown and a cheap 600 cost. On top of that, remember what I said on my previous videos about research combo? Research combos are of course cat combos that decrease your unit's cooldown. A cat unit that has a natural short cooldown benefits the most with research combo, and Royal Guard is definitely one of those cases. If you want to see a full discussion about research combos, I highly recommend you watching my research combo video. But anyways, medium research combo sets his cooldown to 2.8 seconds, and large research combo sets his cooldown to the minimum 2 seconds. Low cooldown and cheap cost are a quality that he already had in his previous forms, but the potential was never truly realized due to the lack of stats. But now every single Royal Guard has a lot of health and deals a crazy amount of damage, so this cooldown and cost is actually really valuable and allows him to stack up and rack up damage incredibly fast. Just be a bit more mindful of your money if you're using max research. To put how fast his damage can rack up into perspective, let's compare it with the current newest strongest relic nuker in the game, Edie's True Form. At level 50, Edie's True Form's effective DPS against Relic is a whopping 100,000 DPS, and he has 4,200 cost. Compare it to Royal Guard, who at level 50 has 25,500 effective Relic DPS with 600 cost. This means that to reach Edie's DPS, you just need 4 Royal Guards totaling at a merely 2,400 cost. And since his cooldown is 4.5 seconds, not counting the first Royal Guard, you can achieve this DPS in 13.5 seconds. But with Research L putting his cooldown to 2 seconds, you can achieve this DPS in 6 seconds. And you can still keep spamming him afterward to ramp up the damage even further. That's how crazy his damage output is. Of course, it's not as simple as it sounds. Edie have the advantage of speed, nuke damage, and rebound, which boost the damage way faster, and Royal Guard can't just continuously stack up on high range enemies, as especially in higher difficulties, he probably won't stack up or survive for too long to create too big of a stack. Plus, there's a few Relic enemies that he can't quite approach that Edie can. Relic Uriel have very fast attack and piercing range. Edie has no problems dealing with these guys as the burst damage is all you need, but Royal Guard can barely survive long enough to land any meaningful hits. But these are extremely specific examples, so it's not too bad. Outside of these, the most common Relic that Royal Guard can't quite approach is Amos. Amos's knockback and slow means that Royal Guard can't land a hit without getting knocked back, and so there's basically no way for Royal Guard to hit Amos on his own. Keyword is on his own. Keep this in mind. Speaking of Amos, remember how one of the main concerns people had about Royal Guard is that the existence of other anti-relic units overshadows his usage or makes him redundant? Well, I'd like to propose another view that is the complete opposite actually. I think the existence of other anti-relics actually validates Royal Guard's existence further. For example, Royal Guard can help Edie clearing off peons to get a clear clear shot, while on the other hand, ED also helps with quickly racking up damage so you can successfully burst down relics easier or interrupt their attacks. Instead of replacing each other, they can compensate for each other's weaknesses. This applies for other units like Doron, Uriel, Fried Chicken, Nala, or even Slapsticks. Doron's the most obvious one, as he basically synergizes with literally anything anyways. Guaranteed long freeze allows Royal Guard to stack up and shred basically anything in front lines. And then Nala and talented Slapsticks can weaken relic enemies, which allows Royal Guard to survive much longer. And then Esoteric Uriel and Fried Chicken's Curse can be used to disable Amos's ability, allowing Royal Guard to tank hits through Amos without getting knocked back or slow. Not only that he does not get overshadowed by anti-relic units, he instead synergizes extremely well with most of them. And even if he's not paired with these units, he can very well work alone all by himself anyways. His strength is legit on par, if not better than some of the common anti-relic choices. Usually people would argue that he's replaceable by Slapsticks, but honestly, Royal Guard outclasses Slapsticks against nearly every relic enemies except for Amos and maybe Mechabun. A better comparison to Royal Guard would be Super Feline, who is also a rusher type unit. Super Feline's piercing and area attack means that he's better against group of relic peons, but Royal Guard's insane damage output is far better for focused rushdown. Plus, Super Feline is extremely difficult to actually obtain, requiring 15,000 user rank. It's much easier to get Royal Guard than Super Feline. One last thing before I wrap this section up is I also want to bring up on how he works on Infernal Towers floor 40. This might sound too specific, but I think it's important to note as going in, I had very little faith that he'd work at all. Relic Eulala is a fast mid-range piercing pusher with big damage that should theoretically counter Royal Guard, but by not meat shielding, you can have the guard constantly chip Eulala down incredibly fast. He even counters the Metal Crocodinator in the stage as he have very fast attack speed. Nearly soloing Infernal floor 40 is not something just any anti-relics can do. So yeah, that's Royal Guard's relic compatibility. He's pretty strong for majority of relic enemies, and he destroys short-range relic enemies and tanks the high-range ones. And even then, sometimes he just work on wild scenarios you might not expect. He's really solid as an anti-relic. Now, what about the new alien targeting? Is he as good as an anti-alien as he is an anti-relic? The answer is sort of yes, but also no. Okay, before we get deeper into that though, let's get one thing off of my mind real quick. A very common argument in why people think that his alien targeting isn't worth much is because Chill Cat exists. Chill Cat is a low-range area attacker with massive damage against aliens with low cooldown. A lot of the things are pretty similar here, except that Chill Cat has slightly better range and area attack, so you can deal with group of alien enemies. So then the question that people ask is, why would you want to use Royal Guard for aliens? He's outclassed by Chill Cat. Now, if you're one of those people that have this question in mind, imagine me grabbing your cranium as I ask you this question. Do you really unironically use Chill Cat? Seriously? If I'm gonna be completely blunt, Chill Cat sucks. Yes, Chill Cat has area attack and better range and even the same knockback count as Royal Guard, but just look at the stats difference between Chill Cat and Royal Guard. It is night and day. Royal Guard has 75% more health, 70% more DPS, a much better speed and cost than Chill Cat. You can invest in Chill Cat's talents to make his price go down, but even then Royal Guard is still cheaper. And even though Chill Cat has area attack, you'll need Chill to constantly attack multiple enemies at once to basically outperform Royal Guard. And that is already very unlikely since Chill Cat's range is still very low anyways. And even if you use a huge amount of dupes and talent orbs to even the playing field, Royal Guard's speed and cost will still always be better. And the speed is especially a core part in why Royal Guard works. It gives him a great advantage in dealing with high range and LD enemies. Even on Chill Cat's potentially best stage, Puffer Planet, Chill still struggles due to the multiple corporal wayland that is spammed in the stage, as Chill Cat would constantly get interrupted and potentially not land any meaningful hits whatsoever. But on the other hand, Royal Guard's incredibly high health pool and high speed allows him to just tank these hits no problem. Warp isn't really a problem either for him, as he has good speed to just immediately go back in after getting warped back. Royal Guard's health and speed provides consistency that Chill Cat never has. Despite Chill Cat's advantages, Chill in a practical scenario gets outclassed by Royal Guard in pretty much every single way. I dare you to name a stage that Chill works better than Royal Guard without boosting Chill to hell and back. Okay, that was a pretty long segment just for comparing him with one unit, but I really gotta get that out of my system, because I genuinely can't believe some people unironically think that Chill is even a worthy competition. That is nuts. Now, that being said, Royal Guard actually does have a problem with aliens more so than relics. Remember what I said about relic enemies, about how they rarely have any mid-range high damage enemy variants like Gory or Bear variants? Well, aliens have those. General Gregory, Scissoru, Imperator Seal, Ursa Major, and much more. They have enough range to outrange Royal Guard while also having a very high damage output. Royal Guard can still survive some hits from them, but he would not survive for too long, and so generally he's usually not the best units you can bring to a stage. You can, however, weaken or freeze these enemies with any anti-aliens that you have to allow Royal Guard to get in and deal more meaningful hits. This definitely can work if you need to rush down something really quick, but on most other scenarios, usually picking a higher range generalist unit would be better. You might still want to keep Royal Guard in mind though, especially since Seafarer is a very common unit to bring to alien stages. But aside from these kinds of enemies though, Royal Guard can still work against a good chunk of alien enemies. He outranges enemies like Starpeng, Nimoy Boar, and Mesocosmic Cyclone. Royal Guard thrives against these enemies as they have low knockback count, allowing Royal Guard to tear them to pieces extremely fast. He also still works against enemies with long time between attacks like Elder Slot, Scissorex, or Kleinwan, or enemies with low damage like Elizabeth, Calamari, or Alpaki. He functions about as good as the higher range relic enemies I mentioned before. He can either tank those enemies or rush them down with good timing. And his damage is even higher against alien enemies since you can get the anti-alien fruit treasures in the Cosmos stages. One more good alien enemies that he can counter is Yukan. But isn't that a bit scary, as Yukan have a really high damaging wave attacks? Sure, it can be scary if it weren't for the fact that Royal Guard is wave immune. Yeah, now we talk about his wave immunity. Royal Guard's wave immunity change is something that not a lot of people talk about. One reason is cause wave blocker's existence, which can invalidate a lot of wave enemies, but a lot of modern stages have already accounted for that and try to create enemy combinations to kill your wave blockers as soon as possible, either by having extremely high damaging melee enemies or having mid to high ranged wave attackers. So there are usually downtimes between your wave blockers where you can get pushed pretty hard. Plus, due to his short cooldown and good health, you can kind of use him as like a pseudo wave immune meat shield. Yeah, maybe he's a bit expensive for a meat shield, but he has great health and packs a punch, or kicks. But something about this might still bug you. I mean, surely it doesn't make him that relevant, right? After all, there are only very few relic and aliens that has wave attacks, right? But to answer that, this is where we segue to our final main point. You see, while it is true that there are very little relic and alien wave enemies, Royal Guard's usage isn't limited to just relic and aliens, because Royal Guard's base stats is already incredibly high that he still works outside of these two traits. So many people are too focused on his relic and alien compatibility that they fail to realize that his base stats already competes with some of the most popular melee units in the game. For comparison, at level 50, his DPS is nearly identical to that of Manic Island Cat. He even has similar tankiness due to his 2 knockback count, on top of being faster and having wave immunity. And we still need to account that he has nearly 4 seconds cooldown that can go to 2 seconds with research combo, and that is ignoring the fact that he still has 3 to 4 times damage advantage against 2 traits. These stats are absolutely no joke for someone this cheap and this spammable. The only unit I can think of that rivals his damage output with this short cooldown is Max Talented Dark Laser. Max Talented Dark Laser is a well-known unit to shred anything when she's allowed to attack freely. Even compared to Royal Guard, her damage is about double of that with higher range and 15% chance to wave. Although Dark Laser does also have double of the cost of Royal Guard. But despite having similar health, Dark Laser struggles really hard against LD enemies or high range enemies for the simple reason that her speed is only 5 compared to Royal Guard's 15. Dark Laser is still extremely powerful to shred melee enemies, but Royal Guard has a wider usage all around thanks to his 15 speed. He still works on any peons he outranges or enemies he can rush down with his speed and health. Low range enemies like boar variants or any basic peon still get shredded by him. And his spam ability means that he's great against zombie enemies that burrows through your defenses, as he's always ready to kick anything that dare to show their face on the ground. Enemies susceptible by rushdowns like sloths or Laboyne or Sunfish variants can also get ran over by him extremely fast. And waver enemies tends to not have gigantic damage to compensate their wave attacks, so Royal Guard doesn't get killed too quickly, so he can usually tank hits while ignoring their wave attacks. He also outranges wave enemies like Honey11, Boar Jr., and Berserkori, allowing him to hit these guys safely and even act like a pseudo meat shield for the next Royal Guards. Royal Guard is quite an insane melee rusher unit, and it's kind of crazy that a lot of people still sleep on him. He works independently with minimal support due to his amazing stats and quick attack animation, while also synergizing incredibly well with any supports that he can get. He is very powerful in any rushdown scenarios you can think of. One thing I almost forgot to mention is that he also has a combo with Future Cat, giving the speed up effect. This combo also makes your entire team more effective to do rushdowns very well, and is very easy to slot in since Future is a simple meat shield and both Future and Royal Guard are anti-relics. Aside from that, Royal Guard's cooldown, speed, and great health also allows him to be very independent and even being a pseudo meat shield when necessary, even outside of his targeted trait, while his wave immunity is a sweet bonus that makes him work really well in more niche. But obviously, Royal Guard isn't without flaws. He's still a melee unit, meaning that stages that have strong mid-range enemies can disable Royal Guard completely, or stages with extremely aggressive pusher enemies can overwhelm Royal Guard easily as well. But that's just how most melee units are, really. That's about as expected. Not even units like Balrog works for every stages, right?
Unfortunately, melee units in general rarely have much stages where they shine, especially in legend stages where most stages are more tailored for range generalist or mid-range spam. Not only that, Royal Guard's low damage per hit type attack still can be problematic in a lot of situations. Even though he's fine for like relics and aliens, his matchup against some of the other peons can be terrible. He takes forever to kill enemies with high knockback count like Gabriels and Dark Doges, and also isn't too good for Aku Doges since you generally want to one-shot them to prevent their Aku shield from regenerating. He's also not great against some enemies that does knockback like Slipnir or Gokuraku or Mr. Mole, as his damage output relies on him actually sticking to his enemies, and every time he gets knocked back he loses his precious time to attack. This is less of a problem on units with slow attack speed. I have explained this before in great length in my previous Bahamut Cat video. Watch that if you want to truly understand this concept and more.
Finally, his other main problem is that he's not the best on stages where money is limited. He shines the best when spammed with research combo, but sometimes more cost-effective options might be what you need. But despite all his flaws, he still has a great amount of overwhelming strength that makes him incredibly good. He's not gonna replace every single melee unit you have, but on the right stages he can shred enemies beyond belief, while casually tanking and stalling enemies all by himself. Melee units are usually the key on some more trickier boss-focused stages, something like Advent stages or Heavenly or Infernal Tower stages, and in these kinds of environment, Royal Guard thrives. But it's weird to say that he's underrated given that he's actually really powerful, but the community's reception is still kind of split, so he kind of is underrated currently. It is a bit wild because I think that he genuinely is amongst one of the best non-Uber units we've got in recent years. I highly recommend you start using Royal Guard more often if you didn't believe in him before. Whenever I test his performance, majority of the time he very much exceeded my expectations. There's already so much testing footage in the background to show how he works out, and I even have a decent chunk of more unused footage that I couldn't even fit in. The UL footages you're seeing are also either 2 or 3 or 4 stars, and while there are a couple of footages that frankly are not really on super difficult stages, like, let's be real, 4-star UL are infinitely easier than 3-star, but there's also plenty of proper challenging stages being showcased in the background where he can run some stuff down to the ground, sometimes all by himself. And even if he doesn't dominate the stage purely by himself, he's still a great asset to bring to a team to work, whether as a peon clearer or a basic melee rusher unit or anything else you can think of. He also has a wave immunity as a bonus. There's so many of these stages where I bring Royal Guard not for the sake of testing, but because I truly believe that Royal Guard is the optimal cat to bring. He is genuinely that Good. Try him for yourself. I implore you to test him out and be amazed by the power of the British Empire. But yeah, that's about it for Royal Guard, I think. If you have any thoughts, questions, or opinions about Royal Guards that I might have missed, let me know in the comments. Are you a Royal Guard believer or are you a Royal Guard denier? If you're still a denier, tell me what your concerns are. Or maybe are you now tempted to switch sides? Seriously, just try him out for yourself. But yeah, that's about it. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll catch you another time. See ya!